those contests where they open a bank vault and you got like 30 seconds to grab as many dollars as you can, and that's kind of what we do with news. Like, oh, how much can I grab so I have information to bludgeon someone on the head with, on Facebook or at Thanksgiving dinner.
So everyone cared about the Rittenhouse trial, but no one knows anything about it. What is wrong with this picture, Joe?
Hello, this is Joe Lindsley in Lviv, Ukraine, and this is the Attention Rebellion podcast produced by the Lviv Lab for the Activation of Democracy. I'm joined by my co-host, James David Dickson, a reporter with the Detroit News in Michigan. Our mission is to, through these conversations, to find ways to create media that gives value rather than steals our attention. And this week we look at one of the biggest topics in America of late and very controversial, with people with strong opinions on many sides, the Kyle Rittenhouse trial. You'll hear at the very beginning, we were just finishing a chat on the way the press has covered the situations in Ukraine vis-a-vis Russia, which we will give that information to you in a separate podcast soon down the road. But for now, here is episode number 3 of Attention Rebellion with me, Joe Lindsley, and my friend James Dickson in Detroit, Michigan. I'm speaking to you from Lviv, Ukraine. Everything we were just talking about, I think, is a perfect. We were talking, with Moscow and Chernobyl and Ukraine, media that just swoops in and has a preconceived notion. I think is a quite perfect segue to the city of Kenosha. I want to get your perspective. I mean, because you're closer to it, and I'm so far removed from it over here. Although a lot of Ukrainians have been following it. I mean, it's sort of a worldwide story, and there are Ukrainian news chats and in Ukrainian language and Telegram, and they're talking about this case. See, that
actually makes me a little bit sad to hear that. I live, a state or two over from Kenosha, Wisconsin. I live in Detroit, Michigan. I live a Great Lake over from where that happened. And I should barely care, right? Like, it doesn't really affect me. It's not based on Michigan law. I've never been to Wisconsin. I've never been to Kenosha. Like, on the merits of it, it doesn't affect me. We get transported across the world into what is really, in the Rittenhouse case, a conflict between 4 different men that, if you add up all the physical contact, it's like 2-3 minutes of video, 2-3 minutes of life. And people a world away are drawing literally global conclusions about what it all means in a case in a small Wisconsin courtroom that was decided by Wisconsin law. I would like us all to consider why we do care so much. So that's one part of it. But look, I work in the news business, so why people do care, they do care. That we know. And that we've known for quite some time. There is, whether it's innate or whether it is a nurtured trait, we all have a curiosity about other people and their lives and what they're up to and what they're up against. And what I find more troubling than the facts of the Rittenhouse case is when I look on my timeline, how few people I see who know anything about the case. Everyone has a strong take. Everyone has a belief about what this case was or was not. But then they'll say something that tells you they can't know what they're talking about. Like, what's a 17-year-old kid doing crossing state lines with an AR-15? Okay, so none of that's true. For one, he didn't cross state lines with the gun. And had he crossed state lines, should it not have been a federal case? Why are people with multiple degrees and who you know personally to be very intelligent, why are they turning their brains off? And where are they getting this misinformation from? Why is it sticking? Why, after a nationally and globally televised trial, are people still offering talking points that if they literally had read one story about the case, they'd know not to make them? How can this be? With all this information, why am I not coming across people who actually know about the case? What are you doing? And what is this? We've talked about what is the consumption doing to you, but I have to ask, what are you doing as a consumer? How do you not know these details? Where are you going? What are you reading? What are you watching that is so narrative driven that you do not know the basic facts of a case that you have strong views about?
It makes me think. As you were saying this, in the image I see in my head is like one of those contests where they open a bank vault and you got like 30 seconds to grab as many dollars as you can, and that's kind of what we do with news. Like, oh, how much can I grab so I have something to, some information to bludgeon someone on the head with, on Facebook or at Thanksgiving dinner. And we're not actually trying to understand the case, but we just want to grab enough little tidbits, so we can join the fray and the arguments.
They have a phrase for this. They say that somebody knows just enough to be dangerous.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's what we've all become. You and I are, professional writers and very critical readers of news. It's a different level than most people know the news or engage with it. They just read the stories. And I have to think that they know something's wrong. And I have to think that when the outcomes of these cases wind up being so wildly different from what you were told, at what point do you realize you were lied to? The people who wanted you mad were not mistaken, but they knew you wouldn't check it out. They knew they'd just have to tell you, and you would take their word for it. And after a breach of trust is discovered like this, after it is provably known, okay, I was listening to the outrage block on MSNBC, I thought a 17-year-old crossed state lines, I didn't ask why they were not charged federally, and now the kid's innocent. I was told he was a white supremacist, and all three of the people he shot were white guys. There's no proof of white supremacy. It's just the heavy breathing that's needed. And so my real concern is that with a public that reads this poorly, that is not reading, the materials closely enough, and they're not reading a varied enough amount of materials to know what's true from what's false, that just spurs on a narrative-driven media where they say facts don't care about your feelings. But what I see is a culture where feelings don't care about your facts. Look, the kid's a white supremacist, and he's a terrorist, and he's all these bad things, and I've decided to think that. And it's funny because you pull different pillars out from that argument, and people will still want to insist on the overall truth. And when that's true, that means you're investing in narratives. When I've talked about how me and narrative writers, me as a journalist and them writing narratives are not in the same business, this is what I mean.
Different business.
You guys talk about larger truths, and it's funny, whenever one of their stories or their narratives, when their narrative unravels, what they always say, and they said it in this case, I've heard it from many people I've talked about the case with. Well, okay, that part of it's not true, but, and basically they're trying to say that the larger truth still holds. You know, they have a phrase for this. They say that somebody knows just enough to be dangerous.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's what we've all become. You know, you and I are, professional writers and very critical readers of news. It's a different level than most people know the news or engage with it. They just read the stories. And I have to think that they know something's wrong. And I have to think that when the outcomes of these cases wind up being so wildly different from what you were told, at what point do you realize you were lied to? The people who wanted you mad were not mistaken, but they knew you wouldn't check it out. They knew they'd just have to tell you, and you would take their word for it. Look, the kid's a white supremacist, and he's a terrorist, and he's all these bad things, and I've decided to think that. And it's funny because you pull different pillars out from that argument, and people will still want to insist on the overall truth. And when that's true, that means you're investing in narratives. When I've talked about how me and narrative writers, me as a journalist and them writing narratives are not in the same business, this is what I mean. I would argue that you can have no larger truth without small t truth. And what we have is people who take a disinterest in small t truth because they're pushing these larger truths. And so you bringing up facts, you looking into things, is suspicious to them.
Theorist or something, and this makes me think of a parallel thing, which really shocked me when I saw this. I think it was last week. I was scrolling through the BBC's app, which I do mainly as a critical exercise, and there was a story where it nonchalantly, just matter of factly, mentioned that the Steele dossier was fraudulent and falsely accused President Trump, of colluding with the Russians. And this is the first time I had seen and so I want to ask you about it because I've been sort of removed from day-to-day American media lately, and because for 4 years, that was the narrative, that was the thing that led to and started the impeachment process, even if it wasn't maybe the controlling thing at the end, but that was the whole narrative that Trump colluded with the Russians, and now just matter of factly. I read in story, and then I looked at other stories, and now the new narrative is, oh yeah, well, that Steele dossier was totally discredited, and Trump did not collude. Russia might have Russia interfered, they say, but Trump did not collude with him. And when did that change? Did you notice a moment when that narrative changed?
Yeah, it was about in the part in Animal Farm when the sheep stopped saying, 2 legs bad, 4 legs good, and they say 4 legs bad, 2 legs better. Now this is after the pigs had started walking up on their hind legs. Yeah. And so when the sheep are told to bleat out a different tune, guess what they do? Yeah. And this is the real danger. I think about The Wire. I think about Stringer Bell. And there was one point when him and Avon Barksdale, they didn't have the best product. And, they were worried. But Stringer said, look, if it's bad, they'll buy twice as much just to get high. And he said a line that stuck with me that I really see a lot in the news industry. He said, whatever we call heroin is going to get sold. And I see this attitude in the news industry that whatever we call news, you guys are going to buy. Even if it is just narratives wrapped in opinions, if we call it news, it's NBC News saying it, right? I mean, that has to be credible. No, it's actually not credible. And the more attention you pay to it, the more you'd see that. But they know we're a distracted world. We're a distracted public. They know everything is half heard. And they take advantage of that. They know you don't read the stories all the way. They know all it takes is a hint of heavy breathing, and your mind will make associations that don't need to be said explicitly. They know you're not paying attention for all you're consuming. So how could this be? People are consuming the news at levels that are untold and unprecedented, or at least they were last year. But they don't feel any better informed. And when you talk to them, it's clear they're not any better informed. So everyone cared about the Rittenhouse trial, but no one knows anything about it. What is wrong with this picture, Joe?
Then this here sets up, maybe it's a dilemma for me, because I think of how we finished the conversation last time when you said, we need less fake caring about people far away from people and events far away from us, and more real caring about the people we know and love, or whom we should know and love, around us. And as you were, I was thinking, oh, well, maybe the easy answer is, hey, I could just choose, kind of like I've chosen, I guess. I could just choose not to care about it, not get involved in debates about it, and not delve deeper. There's one option, and maybe there's something good about it. But here's where there's a dilemma, is because at the same time, because this has been made sort of a key thing, we're all like in the same living room as a nation. And it's become the story that is, because of the narratives that have been created, this story could define where our nation goes. It could define, if there's violence that ensues. It could define federal laws that it created. It could define so many things. And so, in a sense, we not just ignore it? Like, we're forced to be part of it, and so we get further and further into it. So, because it is this main story now, if I want to be a responsible citizen, do I have to investigate it? Do I have to do the opposite of the thing that I really think I should be doing? Like, forget about caring for what's next to me, and then investigate this, because whether we like it or not, this is going to determine what happens, the next months or year in America. Where do you stand on that?
Again, here's what I would ask. First, I'd ask you to consider how much you care. I'd ask you to consider why. And I'd ask the level of effort you put into the caring to match the purported caring. You can't tell me you care, but you've never read the fourth paragraph of a story about it. I would rather you just opt out of that one. You don't have to opt out of everything, but why can't you be more selective? Why can't you be more truthful to yourself and say, you know what? These kinds of stories, they get me arguing with people. It pits me against my neighbor. Doesn't really bring truth or understanding. It's not for me. Either one of those makes sense, doubling down and really getting into the stuff you care about, or cutting that list significantly and saying, I only care about these few things. But this halfway stuff of watching news all day, but you don't know anything, it has to be unsatisfying at some point. And I beg you all for that point to be right now.
Thank you for listening. This has been the Attention Rebellion podcast, part of the Lviv Lab for the Activation of Democracy. You can find More episodes of this podcast and other programs covering various topics at LvivLab.com. That's LvivLab.com. And we look forward to continuing this conversation about how we can create media that gives value rather than steals one of our most precious resources, our attention. Thanks for your attention on this, and we'll hope to catch you on future episodes. Thank you. From Lviv, Ukraine. Do побачення.
Just leaving the night behind.